Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another Mish-Mashing Battle Lounge with the 2MK team.
Round 2. Fight.
It looks like today we are starting off with a relatively unfamiliar matchup, and therefore the possibility for some extra experience. We haven't had much of a payoff for our Oro bot yet, but we'll see. This week in Mish-Mashing is a win 10 Battle Lounge matches week setting for Street Fighter V, and that usually means that you'll get a couple stronger people being willing to play for longer. But it depends on the time of day. These two seem fairly evenly matched though, with some main questions coming up as to which of the two Oro styles does this player choose to use. They seem to be fairly aggressive, but not the type that tries to abuse a specific thing Oro does. They just believe more in their dashes than most people, which is good. This is usually kill, but I guess they either didn't know it for sure or didn't want to go for it. There we go. Extreme patience on both sides there before that even worked out.
Oro wins.
I think that recently I haven't had particularly good connection, so I may not actually be fighting today. Things are a little wobbly in a lot of ways.
Let's do this.
Today our focus is on the turbulence caused by your opponent doing things you don't expect, which is a separate problem from when you make a wrong decision per se. Making an incorrect decision is obviously frustrating, but it doesn't so much matter what your opponent is doing in that moment. You don't necessarily spend any time thinking, my opponent did this. No, it's just, I chose the wrong thing. Or maybe you'll get frustrated that the opponent hasn't changed in a particular way, and a thing you figured, well, by now it must be the right thing, turned out to not be. But we're not talking about that scenario at all. Just literally, I went for this, and even you as the player can see why your opponent didn't quote-unquote fall for it. But from the other side, you have the situation of a player explicitly going for nothing in particular. The opponent just decides, oh, you can't keep up with me, so I'm going to do this now. And it isn't always true that this is just a matter of, I can't physically do the thing, or I'm not expecting you to do this particular thing because it's weird or crazy. It can just be that they have more confidence in something than you do. Obviously, the chances are, in most games, that this is just spacing that they have additional trust in. But for characters like Oro, who have options for good setups, you can immediately see that he has ways to do this that are entirely based on whether or not you thought in time to get out of situation A. Similarly, an opponent who is willing to just block their way through things can be the same type of problem. But this can make you feel like you made the wrong decision and cause turbulence when that isn't really what happened. It's more often that your opponent wasn't confident that they knew what you were going to do next, and therefore kept blocking because that's probably the better option, just in case. Than that they specifically went, yeah, I got you, I know exactly what to do here. And you can usually tell because a lot of the time, if they block well enough, they'll end up at some weird spacing instead of just being wherever they want to be. It's not even fair to say that it's up to you to try to open them up in that situation, because it's really not that necessary. While this game does not have any guard break or similar things, you still benefit quite a lot from getting people to block for long periods. Particularly if you have good character knowledge, because even though you could technically try to get a throw, it's often easier to simply put your opponent into a situation that you are very comfortable in, but think that they might not be, and just keep going. People do, on their end, often get pretty turbulent when they realize, I have no answer to this. You keep doing this thing over and over, and I can't seem to stop you. Lots of people will try to uppercut out eventually. If they don't have that option, they'll figure out something else of similar movement. And having enough experience with Oro bots and similar means that you don't have to worry as much about being caught off guard by things. There's usually going to be some spacing problem or some understanding thing, but not necessarily like, oh, I don't know what to do here. You see Sun demonstrating this already. The block strings that have been used so far, Oro doesn't have a real good response, you could say, to just red fireball at the end. Really perfectly done there, knowing that that's going to recover before the uppercut, even with everything else happening. But similarly, from the Oro side, knowing I can jump this, I don't have to worry about this move here. I think the red fireball is one of the things that Oro players have to deal with and quote-unquote fear the most, but because he has such a good jump, it's more about catching them in the situation where they don't want to try to escape it quickly. You have to get pretty close before it's a good idea to throw the red fireball, as just normal. But the amount of close is very specific. He's not a terribly difficult character to get close to, and he doesn't necessarily get a lot out of you being at that range either. So, you can get red fireball more often than most. Your opponent then has to block it more, which, in addition to being decent chip damage and meter gain for Akuma, yet again puts Oro at a space he doesn't necessarily want to be at. It's not really obvious, but he doesn't do that well at that precise spacing you just saw. Not sure what that was for. Oh right, the super setup. Got it. Still, kinda needed to do it anyway, so here we are, red fireballing our way in. But at least the main super setup is gone. And the fireball again. As the Oro player, your best bet in this situation is usually to take a hit. Not necessarily from the fireball though. You can neutral jump and hope that you get, like, uppercut a little bit. And if you were using the other V skill, hopping into it I think will sometimes just beat the fireball timing if your opponent delayed at all. Fortunately for Oro, once he does block the fireball, there's not much he has to fear other than a perfect step forward into another fireball. There's usually a micro walk involved, and the main thing that stops this from being dangerous to Akuma the majority of the time is simply that you could deal with that situation without specifically putting yourself in more danger. Oro's moves just don't tend to reach. This is usually a good thing for him in certain ways because it also means he pulls back his hurt boxes really quickly against characters who hit from there, but it doesn't generally help.
It's go time.
But off they go for now. Oh, they actually did confirm this time. Possibly it was ping expectations? What's my mindset? Yeah, I think I probably did pick the right character today.
Nash.
I'll show no mercy.
Nash is a character that causes this for many players and for many opposing characters in a different way. Nash requires different punishes, to the point where we also considered using the Nash bot as the autopilot bot precisely because he requires them that way. That came out wrong. He also requires different spacings for certain aspects of your plan to work in the first place. Which is why you'll see a lot of stuff come up here where I have to relearn to myself, okay, I'm supposed to do this, not this. All the buttons you hit normally for other people become weirdly bad ideas against Nash. To the point where I have like 6 different combos I've built up just for Nash that I don't have to use on anyone else ever. Is that throw invincible? I think it is. Added to that, my general difficulty with playing against defensive players and characters, and you have a recipe for confusion, which is exactly the sort of thing we're talking about. It isn't really necessarily that I'm feeling here that I'm making wrong decisions per se. My opponent is just doing things that I don't expect, but they're not necessarily doing those things. The character does those things practically for them. See that, for example, I expect most characters to be hit by that, both by their timings and their flows in general. The thing is that this isn't terribly different from the Nash bot, so it's not really that weird. There's just a whole lot more evasiveness to this character than you might think if you're used to playing people who stay still. But I'm back in rhythm now, I think. Yeah, there we go. Now I remember which buttons. See? That is not a thing you do normally. Right, and now we're at the... I'm going to run away a bit. I think they just wanted me to use a super, which is fine. That is good strategically, so I'll take it. Because now I am disadvantaged enough, they have super, but we are still back at the point where I could think of something to do. They similarly can just use theirs whenever they need to. My goal therefore should be to put my opponent in the corner as quickly as possible so I can control their situation. They're not jumpy enough for this to work, though. And by jumpy I mean the sort of person who does something because it seems like a good idea to do it, more so than because they've thought through the situation. In fact, that was technically exactly the situation where you gain something in terms of understanding the opponent. It's very difficult to do in a tournament, which is why you look up your opponents for tournament beforehand if you can. Simply because if you find yourself in that sort of situation, where the character is either unfamiliar or unpracticed in some way, and you find yourself having to face that adaptation, you also will drop at least some of the things required to do the rest of it. Basically, by being able to sit on the meter, my opponent was able to convince me not to do wake-up pressure, because I don't want to get supered, but it's really easy to get supered. But I don't know if they're the sort of person who is thinking about tricking me into not doing pressure, or if they're the sort of person who actually would have done super. And that's not really the sort of thing you could figure out easily by watching matches, but it is at least not matchup dependent. And when something isn't matchup dependent in that way, you can use your understanding of the opposing player as your decision process, rather than how do these two characters interact. So we could have had a situation in which I did get killed by their super, and then have to deal with their pressure while having no meter of my own. Technically, what I probably should have done was fight until I got meter, and then done more pressure, because I would at least have a wake-up option that they would have to think about. The same sort of thing is likely to happen in this matchup. I think that these two have fought before, maybe. Barely timed that, but... yeah, I'm remembering them better now. This person thinks a lot, and it will usually do things to outsmart other people, so I probably shouldn't have even done the super to win, really. I needed it too much. But I think they've also fought us enough, and possibly even watched streams enough to know that I was going to be annoyed if they did dash back anyway, so that is a point of actually knowing your opponent and actually being able to mess with them because of it. That is technically why here it makes more sense for Sun to fight in this extremely, let's call it straightforward method. Because we see the result being the opposite. Actually, I'm now going to go for super because I know that the way you have to beat me is being straightforward and somewhat aggressive. It is still the correct way to fight this player. It's just that because of that, it's difficult to do certain things when they're ready. Outspacing them, as just demonstrated, is a really good option because players who play like this often have a lot more expectations about spacing. Technically, Nash would have been a better pick here too, because this is not something Sun is likely to make a lot of mistakes in if it comes to just, should I be here for this pressure type? See? Sufficient practice with just spacing and understanding of what your options are at spaces makes playing this way a little more dangerous. But in the end, you just practice at it and get better from the same opponent. Or rather, the same opponent type, i.e. us. But we'll note that in this situation you really have to think about it because you don't have as much health lead as you ever think you do. This opponent requires you to play in this way, but has meter to kill you with if they get the right opportunity. So your health should not be considered to be high just because you're doing okay. Just remember that super meter is there for the purposes of finishing you off, more so than for a bunch of other options. You could try to avoid the situation, but as noted before, the player isn't really the type that will let you do that. Unfortunately, that light kick I don't think is plus enough to do anything after, but it was still a really good idea, I think. This is a sort of player where you gain the most information in offense, usually. Mainly because when you face them, you learn more about how to make their moves with by being in specific places. But off they go for now. Given the purpose and flow for today, we might change lounge to someone else's lounge entirely, or just recreate this one. But at least a match is definitely happening, and I'm probably playing Colleen this time. Because we did try this somewhat recently. I'm going to use Diamond Dust today, Inside Slash today too, I think. And I want to see whether or not that was me, my internet, or what. Because there was a bunch of stuff I was off by 1 frame of the last time we fought. And there are reasons for that, possibly. So I'm going to look into whether or not it keeps on happening, or if I was just off that day or what. Why do I keep missing that? This is also a good matchup for me to practice and force myself to think about throw attacks in, because at least in this case the throw happens under my conditions. Persistence. Got it this time.
win.
The reason I chose to use the inside slash, though I generally don't in this matchup, is simply because my mindset is different right now. Realizing that I am in the mode where I will use inside slash even in this matchup where it's going to be less effective normally. But I don't want to stand at the space where the other one helps. My goals in movement aren't likely to be the same. So even though I don't use it, that's sort of the reason why I felt okay picking it. This is a thing that happens quite a lot actually, where you know I'm not going to need this tool, but does that mean I need to pick the other one? But that situation was the situation in which the Glacier threw matters more. I would probably have not gotten, and similarly there, although I would have gotten hit there at least. At least that time I wasn't trying to parry.
Final round. Fight.
We saw this somewhat, and was very inspiring somewhat to OmniRabbit about the EVO Championship, in that IDOM chose V-Trigger 2 for Lara, but in all of the matches we watched, barely used it ever.
It's go time.
Alright, we are at 20 minutes left in this. Let's poke around outside, let's say, and then recreate, and if we recreate, we'll just end up having the same matches. So from my side, let's see who's hanging around. Remembering, of course, that I am specifically looking for EU at the moment. Well, EU that's likely to not fuss about the whole rank thing. See.
Let's do this.
Generally, when someone does not label their lounge at all, it's hard to determine whether or not it's a good idea to join. But and it's obviously true that not everyone just like wants to be on some random person's stream. Which is generally why we don't do Mish-Mashing as much.
Round
But at the same time, you kind of know that this will happen eventually. And yes, I've been explicitly told that this was the one to join, so it's a good chance that... Yep. I think... I don't remember this person at all. Mild drop there, but... they seem to have that understanding, which comes up quite a lot. If you drop a combo that pops your opponent up a lot, you might have like some unconventional Oki you can use to check. Your opponent is busy thinking, ah, you dropped your combo, thank goodness. No. This doesn't look like Mercy, it looks more like a lesson day. Yeah, probably a lesson day. Not necessarily sure if one should interrupt lessons, but we're here, so...
Final round. Fight.
Just don't be surprised if this lounge falls apart, or something, because we might not be the guests that they were either expecting or wanting. Okay, lesson part seems to be over for now. No drop this time. Okay then.
Akuma wins.
Obviously shilling for ourselves here. We still recommend bots above learning things in this way, because it can be too easy to get caught up in the idea that beating the other player is important, even when the other player's style, the other player's entire goal is to show you that you're doing the wrong thing by demonstrating it doesn't work as quote-unquote gently as possible. I think that one was just a drop.
Round 2. Fight.
Oof. That was possibly also a drop. The other problem is, of course, that it's difficult to explain to another person, no, don't do that. Okay. So, do we get kicked out, or do we get matches? Kicked out. It's not that uncommon for people to make larger lounges than are necessary. for lesson time, simply because you might get people you want to actually have other people fight. But for all I know, that was only a single kick, and Sun will get some match. In the meantime, I will be taking stock some more. No, definitely both kicked. But nothing much to go with here, so can probably go back to our original. Therefore, I will await launch creation. Assuming it's even working correctly. I will try to find it this way, as it usually implies that other people can't either, if I know.
It's go time. Let's do this.
Generally, playing against Colleen requires more fireball game out of Akuma, similar to Oro. And similar to Oro, she doesn't generally reach. Now my mindset shifted enough that I'm probably thinking about getting closer to people, rather than standing there. I should probably watch more Kawano matches to figure out exactly what is done here, because the response I have to Akuma Fireball game is probably wrong.
Round one. Fight.
Because it's very low damage and doesn't really lead to anything specifically clear in terms of how Colleen should fight it. There's two ways I generally deal with this. One is to get away altogether. Oh wait, I still picked Inside Slash somehow. Oh, I changed V-Trigger instead. I always do this. I have applied a double debuff to myself. But relative to this is fine, because the Fireball game has the same solution. First, get out of range. Whether or not you actually do this by doing the right thing or not is up to your opponent's perception, not yours. The second step is this. Your opponent can react to it, but you don't generally get hurt too badly for doing it. Aggression is a different type of answer, but dash blocking doesn't get you too far, whereas using medium vanity step and managing to block is useful. However, I believe Sun's automatic reaction would have negated any benefit I got, because if you use his E as Fireball, all you have now is a Colleen that is next to you and is minus. This is one of those matchups where you are trying to take damage, you just want to take a very specific type of damage. Ah, I forgot about that. This V-trigger is not the one for when you actually want to walk in on people either, even though it would give you better range. The range isn't the thing you're aiming for. I don't know if I was minus enough that I couldn't have parried that. I think I am minus enough.
You win.
Despite our later start, we're not necessarily going on for much longer. And I keep on having Sun thread the needle because of being able to air Tatsu against the hail, which I believe works all the time on light hail, and generally works against medium, because if I was throwing medium, again, if I'm throwing hail in order to hit you and you jump Tatsu it, it just works most of the time. I think Ken has trouble with this because reasons, but Ryu and Akuma, I think it just works. Caught. Caught twice. 3 times. Yeah, I don't think I'd ever be a person that uses this V-trigger. The interesting thing you'd probably have noticed if you got to watch a lot of the Evo was that once you've gotten high enough, the specifics of these things matter a lot less. Top players don't let you use half these things anyway. So while it's definitely not a wasted question of which thing to be using, you do have to think in different ways altogether. I don't remember if Vanity Step would have worked there. Huh.
Final round. Fight.
Right, invincibility.
You win. It's go time.
Alright then, I guess this is probably the last. Because it's probably going to go on a while.
Let's do this.
The main interesting thing I find here is that in the end, if I'm playing Colleen against Akuma, an Akuma who understands the matchup, it feels more like I'm fighting Zeku on any other character. Okay, fix that this time. Because Colleen has so many things that require her to go backward first, it gives a lot of time for reaction, and certain preemptive things work better from Akuma's side.
Round one. Fight.
And for any of you who are wondering, is my opponent actually really just beating Blizzard heal on reaction with Tatsu? Yes, they are. Spacing was fine, follow-up was not. When you reach this point, therefore, the fact that I'm not switching, making the decision constantly, should I use this or something else, is the problem. At any given moment, I should be making a very real, specific decision as to whether or not it's time for one thing or the other. Getting too locked into one way of thinking means that your opponent simply have to change to their correct way of thinking, and chances are, because of the way that people's minds work, it won't help you. In that situation, for example, didn't switch, so lost out. And that one was distance. Doing this at close range isn't really any different from doing it at longer ranges. It just feels different because we're conditioned often. Some of us, I should say, are conditioned to believe that when you're closer to your opponent, you're in more danger. But if you consider what fighting Zaku is like, you're in more danger when you're further from Zaku, just not the same type of danger. Technically, I would like to be closer to Zaku at nearly all times. Didn't have enough meter for that. I think I was expecting that to run out, but why? If there was a double fireball, there had to be enough of it left. And there was no move used previously either. Range is off again. Insufficient. Not bad though. That brings us to the end of our EU stream. You can join us later for our NA version at 7:30 Eastern Time. We expect to see more action on that side, partially because of the Win 10 Battle Lounge matches and so on. We're going to try for Melty Blood tomorrow. The Tuesday melt should be happening. The EU version? Probably, in fact, hopefully not. But we might get something in the evening. And still possibly get Wednesday night in Birth, because the days are going to be somewhat cooler. On Thursday, you will get another Feeling Thursday KOF 15 Battle Lounge, and on Friday we have a new disc guidance for basically the same bot because we were able to get some final changes done over the weekend to make it more effective across multiple characters. And that means that the old one, while not invalid, should definitely be clarified a bit, as well as getting a better look at what the characters who were improved look like with the new inputs, with the new finalized inputs. The new finalized inputs themselves are on our website, 2-mk.org, and you can use about 5 different bots off this one input. So if you were holding out for our KOF bot content and struggling through with just Iori bot, you now have lots more things you can do without having to worry about that one bot limit that the game has. So look out for that, and hopefully we will again be having content all week, so both 60 times DOA 6 Battle Lounge and Do Not Falter, our DNF Battle Lounges on Sundays, will all be happening, bringing us right back around to another Monday Mish-Mashing for Street Fighter V. But this has been Rillian for Team 2MK. Good luck with your training and good night everyone.